Well, that sucked. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. Or does it? I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, that was awful. Grossi. And today we are going to be talking about the Green Bay Packers choking, collapsing, whatever word you want to throw in there, against the Cleveland Browns, losing with a score of 10-13. And yeah, this was a real tough game for the Packers. Unfortunately, losing this game literally in the last 4 minutes. We're going to talk about everything that led up to this game, but there are a few things to break down to even how we got to this point. Before we start breaking down some stats, let's talk about some injuries. Zach Tom heading into this game was already questionable. Tucker Kraft, who also was questionable, thankfully wound up playing. But Zach Tom, on the very first snap on offense, he injured his oblique once again, so it seems pretty evident that he was not ready to return. We'll see kind of what that injury is going to look like going forward. Hopefully it only continues to be day to day, as Zach Tom, who got that extension, is one of, if not our best offensive linemen. And so losing him, that would be a problem. On top of that, Javon Bullard and Aaron Banks getting injured in this game. Aaron Banks getting injured in the first half. Javon Bullard getting knocked out later in that game. Thankfully, Bullard was able to walk to the sideline, but not something that you want to see at all. And so heading into this game, there were already some injury concerns, but losing Zach Tom and Aaron Banks made it a very long day for this offense. Jordan Morgan, he had a tough one, whether it was the penalties or trying to go one-on-one with Myles Garrett. It was a tough assignment for Jordan Morgan. And I'm a bit surprised, honestly, because while he didn't get a ton of playtime last year, during this offseason and preseason, he looked really good. And so while this was a really bad day for him, I'm going to hold at least some of my judgment against him because, one, he's going against Myles Garrett and a very good Browns defense. And two, considering he was just thrown into the fire there, I'm going to give him a little bit of grace, but a very challenging day for Jordan Morgan. But he wasn't the only one who had a challenging day, because the Green Bay Packers as a whole had 14 accepted penalties. The lack of discipline was absolutely infuriating, whether it was on the defensive side of the ball and giving the Browns multiple attempts to score in the red zone, or it was on the offensive side of the ball. And every single time that there was a positive play, it was getting called back. It was pretty bad today. And while the Packers, the first two games, have played very good football on both sides, today it was definitely clear which side of the ball played better, and that was definitely the defense. But first, let's talk about the offense of the Packers today. Jordan Love, 18 for 25, 183 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and 5 sacks. We mentioned that he was pressured all day. The 5 sacks number is pretty atrocious. And I know that a lot of folks were looking past the Cleveland Browns, especially after the Ravens whooped them last week. But taking a look at that game, considering a lot of those points came off of turnovers, you got to give a ton of credit to that Browns defense. They shut down the Bengals in week 1, and they shut down Derrick Henry at least in week 2. And here, they shut down basically the entirety of the Packers offense all day. But let's talk about that Jordan Love turnover, because his first interception of the season came at the very worst time. It was 3rd down. The Packers had a chance to really seal the game, but unfortunately he did not see the defender, and Jordan Love threw the ball right to him, ultimately setting the Browns up with a very short field, and they were able to punch it in with a Judkins touchdown and tie the game. And so this really just all fell apart in the very end of the game. The Packers were up 10-0 in the last 4 minutes, and even after that interception, the Packers still had an opportunity to win that game if it wasn't for that blocked field goal. But before we get to that, continuing with the offense, unfortunately for Josh Jacobs, we mentioned how Derrick Henry was shut down last week. Josh Jacobs had one heck of a day, and not in a good way. 16 carries for only 30 yards, was averaging less than 2 yards a carry, and without getting into the end zone, unfortunately, his streak of scoring a touchdown in the last 12 games comes to an end. He was 2 away, including playoffs, from the record, and yeah, it was just a tough day once again for that Packers run game, who really hasn't been able to get it going the first 3 weeks, and today it was real tough. However, the Packers' leading receiver was the rookie. Packers fans have been begging for it for the past 2 weeks. Matthew Golden, 4 receptions for 52 yards. They also utilized him in the run game as well, and he looked pretty speedy. He had a big catch late in that game down the right sideline, and things are at least looking up for Matthew Golden. His separation percentage has been at the top of the league the first 2 weeks, and he played pretty darn well today. But even though the Packers offense struggled, let's talk about that defense, which once again played a really damn good game. Quay Walker led the team in tackles with 6 solo tackles and 14 total. This is now 5 straight games with a sack for Rashawn Gary, so super impressive for him. Micah Parsons also had 2 QB hits and finally even got a holding call against him, so that was kind of nice. But Micah Parsons also got knocked out in that game earlier on. He wound up coming back in due to an injury. They were looking at his leg, so hopefully that is nothing to worry about as they have a big game against the Cowboys coming up this Sunday night. But again, the defense basically did everything you could possibly ask of them. Joe Flacco was really inefficient throughout the day, whether he was throwing high passes or getting some pressure. He threw for 21 for 36, 142 yards, and an interception. That interception from Xavier McKinney, who got his very first turnover of the season. And for the most part, they held the running game in check as well. Those first 2 weeks, they allowed less than 100 yards total. Judkins, however, as that game went on, he started to tear some off. Went 18 for 94 and of course had a touchdown at the very end. Njoku was their leading receiver, 5 receptions for 40 yards. And so taking a look at this game, it's like I said earlier, with the last 4 minutes left, I thought, okay, the Packers are going to win a very ugly game against a tough AFC North defense, and we're going to move on and we're going to go to the Cowboys. The problem is that the Packers did not close out this game. You could look at some play calling. Of course, you look at that bad interception, and on top of that, the blocked field goal, which you have to give credit to that Browns special teams. At the same time, you look at Rich Bisaccia, who has been under at least some pressure from the fan base because the special teams these last few years have not been the very best, and he's the highest paid special teams coordinator in the NFL. And so something's got to change there. McManus was able to hit one earlier field goal, but this one at the very end getting blocked. And the thing that I want to make very clear is even though Jordan Love threw a really bad interception, he was still one of the reasons why they were able to move down the field. Yes, you had that penalty in coverage with Romeo Doubs, but Jordan Love got the team down the field. It was a nice pass to Tucker Kraft, and it looked like the Packers were going to win this game and only leave about 30 seconds on the clock for the Cleveland Browns. And so once again, Jordan Love, even after a bad turnover, was able to recoup and get the team to where it needed to be. The problem is when you put this entire game together, the Packers should have won this football game. They ultimately didn't. A huge kudos and GGs to the Browns because they were able to put it together at the very end and take advantage of the Packers' mistakes. But it was 14 penalties, bad blocking, an offense that really couldn't move the ball a whole lot that day. And ultimately, it came back and it bit them in the butt. Because both these teams were barely on the opposing side of the field. They were both 1 for 2 in the red zone. And so again, you look at both defenses and go, oh, okay, both defenses are really good. And I think that was the case today. Unfortunately for the Packers, they came up on the losing side of this because it all just fell apart at the end. And so now the Packers are heading into Dallas sitting at 2-1. The good news, the Packers are still 2-1. It was a non-conference game. And again, the defense for 3 straight weeks has looked really, really good. The bad, the Packers have injuries on the offensive line. Jordan Love was running for his life. The bad turnover and the amount of penalties all amounted to what was a very disappointing game. And so while this is not the end for the Green Bay Packers, I do think week 3, this was kind of a wake-up call. Those first 2 weeks, I mean, you heard it here. I could not have been happier with the defense's performance. Micah Parsons was playing well, and the offense was clicking. The offense definitely didn't click today going up against a tough defensive opponent, and ultimately, their own mistakes of shooting themselves in the foot, it wound up costing them. And so now, Packers are 2-1. Please, let's burn this play tape and hopefully get better as the season goes along. Because the things from this game, they can easily clean it up. You do worry about the injuries, especially along the offensive line, and that is a concern. But the penalties, you can clean that up. You can move the ball. Hopefully they can establish the run. We'll see when Marshawn Lloyd is going to come back at some point. But yeah, a tough game for the Packers this week. And this one's going to sting for a little bit. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. How do you feel about this collapse? Let me know. You guys find me at TomGrossiComedy.com, and a big shout and thank you to all the Patreon and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack, go.